For anyone interested in using Narrative Tales, which is our quest and dialogue tool, our community manager Dan, or Decryption, has made a really big documentation video to help you get set up. So take it away, Dan.
Narrative Tales was built over the course of 7 years to give you all of these tools right out of the box, and only takes a matter of a few hours to learn. This guide will take you from a total beginner and give you all of the skills you need to make any mission or dialogue that you can think of. We're going to go all the way from installing the plugin, all the way to implementing metahumans, using facial animations, setting up dialogue, quests, and a ton more. This tutorial is going to be broken down into 7 segments to teach you each area of Narrative Tales. The install, the dialogue, the narrative events, narrative conditions, the quests, combining it all together, and then the party system. Here is the final result we're going to work towards.
There's a player here, look, guys! Oh my god, sweet release! We have been standing here for what feels like years.
Why are you guys here? We got a job as NPCs for this narrative tutorial. It lets you make missions and dialogues very easily in Unreal Engine 5. Seems pointless if you ask me. Right, Mark? Mark doesn't talk much, but he agrees.
So the first thing you're going to need to do is to purchase Narrative Tales. Now we are aware it's an expensive plugin, but it's one that's going to save you months of time creating it yourself. As you can see, we've almost got a perfect 5-star review, and our Discord has thousands of happy customers all using it daily. So once you've purchased it, you are going to also need to get our free plugin, Narrative Common UI. So you can just head over to the publisher and select Narrative Common UI. Narrative Tales is built on top of Unreal's Common UI system. This lets you seamlessly switch between consoles and PC or different control methods seamlessly without having to constantly change the code or constantly reroute the input to the new menus. It handles it all for you and it's completely for free. So once you've gone and downloaded those, head over to your Epic Marketplace and just come and search for the Narrative Suite, and you want to install Narrative Tales and Narrative Common UI. So just install that to the engine. Once you've installed it, load up your Unreal Engine and we'll just come and create a new project. Now in this tutorial we are going to be using Unreal 5.7, one of the latest ones out, but Narrative Tales is fully supported all the way back to Unreal 5.1. We'll just use the third person example, target platform desktop, and we'll just keep the variant as none for now. We'll come and set the project name to something like Narrative Training and we'll click create and wait for it to load up. Now once you've got it set up, we do actually recommend you move the plugins from your engine to your project directly. So just head down to your content folder, right click on your content folder and just choose Show in File Manager. And then go ahead and close your Unreal project down. Move that off to the side and then come and find where you've installed your Unreal Engine. So for me, it's in my Documents, Unreal Engine. It might be wherever you installed it. Simply go into Engine, Plugins, Marketplace, and you'll see all the plugins that you've installed. So you can see I've got Narrative and Narrative Common UI. We actually recommend you cut this and paste it inside your project. So where your project's content folder is, go out a folder so you can see the content and the config, create a new folder called Plugins, capital P, and just paste them in there instead. This moves the plugins from your engine level to your project level. It gives you several benefits, and it means when you make backups of your project, you're backing up the plugins alongside of it, so you don't break it if there's an update. And we have seen it in the past with other plugins where Unreal will accidentally automatically update them and make you lose any changes and customization you've done. So now you can go ahead and reopen your project. So I'll just come and select my projects and use the Narrative Training. So once it's loaded up, Narrative Tales only takes a couple of minutes to set up, and it can be integrated into an existing game or a brand new game. So feel free to adjust it here and there for whatever your circumstance is. Firstly, we need to enable the Common UI settings because that requires an Unreal reboot. So just firstly go to Edit, Plugins, and let's just make sure it's all enabled. So if I search for Narrative, you can see they're both ticked. If they're not ticked, tick them and restart. Once you've done that, go to Edit, Project Settings, and let's configure Common UI for our project. Again, if you've already got Common UI set up, you may have to do some tweaking, in which case reach out to the Discord, we can help you along with that. But otherwise, come to the project settings, under Game, go to Common Input Settings, set the input data to be BP Narrative Input Data. For the platform input, depending on what system you're on or what systems you want to support, drop down that box. So I'm on Linux at the moment, but it works on Windows, Android, iOS, Mac. Drop it down, open up default, set the default gamepad name to be generic, capital G, and then drop down the controller data, however many platforms you want to support, and just come and set them to be the provided control data. So I want to support keyboard and mouse, Xbox and PS4. PS4 and PS5, they're backwards compatible with each other, so you'll be safe to select that. You can also support Switch if you want to, that's built in as well. You can easily make your own custom ones of these if you want to support VR controllers or something different. Finally, just come back to the search and search for Viewport, and just set the Game Viewport client class to be Common Game Viewport, otherwise your controls won't work. And now just hit restart and we'll come back into Unreal. Now that we've got the project settings set up, we can now start adding narrative tails to our game. So firstly, you want to add the narrative tails component to either your controller or your pawn. Depending on your game and how your system's working, may want to choose one over the other. Typically, we recommend putting it just on the player controller, because even if you end up switching characters, it'll all work seamlessly. So I'm just going to come and add the narrative tails component to my player controller. If you've got a game where you have multiple players that you can switch between, and you want them to all remember their own quest, their own dialogue, then you probably attach it to the pawn instead, but that comes with other challenges that we'll get onto later. Once you've added it here, we actually need to use the built-in narrative UI. So if you've already got a HUD, go and open that up. We don't seem to have one. So I'm just going to come and create a UI folder. And inside here, I will create a new user interface widget blueprint, standard user widget, and I'll call it WB for widget blueprint _ players HUD. And I'll open this up. Inside here, I'll just add a default canvas panel, and then we can use the two narrative UIs. So we want the narrative 3 overlay. This is what gives you the speaking text and the quest updates. Just make sure this is full screen. So select it, select the anchors, and hold Control and Shift as you click full screen to full screen it with all the pivot points. The second one we need is the common UI part that takes over your import, lets you interact with people. And we want the WBP narrative HUD. Typically, it's better to have the narrative HUD underneath your overlay so it's on top of it. And we're going to set the anchors to be full screen as well. So don't worry about the notifications here. They are invisible when you play the game by default anyway. It's just to show you it's there. And then back on our controller or your pawn, after you've added the mapping context, let's just drag off and do create widget. And we'll add our player's HUD. We'll promote this to a variable because we're going to need to use it later. And I'll call it player's HUD. And then finally, we will add this to the viewport. We can wrap that in a comment just to make it nice. Add player's HUD. Finally, the last step is we actually need to tell narrative that when we start dialogue to activate it on the HUD. So the options. So simple enough, right click the narrative component, add event on dialogue began. Drag off of the dialogue and choose Get Free Movement. This is something we'll come on to later. And then if you're in Unreal 5.6 or 5.7, you can right-click the ball and choose Convert to Branch. If you're on anything before that, just add a regular branch node, like so. But for us, we can do this. On false, we want to drag the player's HUD in. We want to get the narrative HUD, and then we want to call Open Menu, which is how we open common UI menus in narrative. And we'll connect that to the false. We don't want to do this if we're on free movement. And just set the widget class to be the dialogue here. And hit compile and save. And that's pretty much it for the install. You can play the game, you can run around, nothing has changed. Some of the other things that are optional, but we do highly recommend you doing, and we're going to do now as part of the install because it's just better to do it early, is to create master, dialogue, and quests, or parents if you wish. One quest and one dialogue that can be overridden, that can be used as a parent for all of your other ones, so you can make bulk changes if you need to. So simply come into your content folder, create a new folder called narrative, and inside here I will create a folder called quests and one called dialogue. Jumping into the dialogue folder, I will just right click narrative and we'll choose dialogue, and I'll call it DB for dialogue blueprint _ master dialogue. But you can of course call it whatever you want. Do the exact same thing in the quests, except go narrative quest and call it QB for quest blueprint master quest. We can save that and then go to edit, project settings, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we've got some built-in narrative ones here. So you can go into narrative dialogues and set the default dialogue class to be our new master dialogue, and then do the same in narrative quests editor to the master quest here. Finally, the other thing you want to check is when we create custom quest tasks, which are objectives, there is actually a quest search path to make it more efficient when designing quests. So if any of these don't match up with where you roughly want to put your tasks, feel free to modify it now. Since our folder is going to be narrative tasks, it will automatically pick our tasks up. And that's it for the Narrative Tales install. So now let's go on to create our first dialogue. So simply come to your content drawer, narrative dialogue, so my dialogue folder, right click, narrative, and choose dialogue here. I'm going to call this DB _ Nick, and we'll just open this one up. So it's pretty much split up exactly how a blueprint script is. You have your components and your variables down the left side, you have your graph in the middle, and then you have your details down the right side. In the class defaults for the dialogue, there are a bunch of settings to customize the dialogue in many different ways. The key ones for the moment are the speakers, which are the NPCs in the dialogue. So we'll just add a speaker, and we'll set the speaker ID to be Nick, and the speaker name is if you want to display it visually on the screen as something different, otherwise it'll use the ID. For now, we'll leave that where it is, but we can come all the way down all these different settings, and we can also just assign a default shot for now. So we'll just select medium camera angle. Narrative Tales comes with a bunch of different camera angles you can set up to really hone in with your dialogue and what you want. Otherwise, you can use the built-in level sequence asset or just create your own shots. It's just using the Unreal sequencer. You can even add a minor camera shake if you really want to, so we'll just do a handheld camera shake. Now, you'll notice we have two tabs, the event graph. This is where you can code your dialogue to do anything specific, spawn an item, move somebody around, and then you have the core dialogue graph tab here. This is how we create the dialogue. So we'll just come and set this root node to be our speaker of Nick. So you'll see it automatically goes to Nick's color. You can change this to anything you want as well. And then you simply drag down from the node to create your next dialogue line. So we can create a line for Nick. So inside here, I'm just going to come and set the text to be, "Hi, I'm Nick." And then we've got a bunch of settings on each individual node where we can change how long it lasts. So you can set it to infinite, specific times, or based on a sequence. You can set sounds, animations, a specific camera shot, and there's a bunch more that we'll cover later. But for now, let's just add some more dialogue. So I'm going to come and add another speaker to the class defaults. So we can just come and add another speaker of Mark, and we'll add another one of Rupert as well, because Narrative Tales is built in to allow you to do single dialogue or multi-NPC dialogue. So we'll drag down from Nick, and you can see we can now add the new speakers. So we'll add Mark, and I'll set his text to be, "And I'm Mark." We'll also add one for Rupert, just so he can introduce himself. And we'll come here and say, "And I'm Rupert." And we'll hit compile and save. And that's pretty much our dialogue setup. Don't worry about the warnings for now. That is just saying we've not assigned sounds to these, but we can absolutely turn that off if we go to edit, project settings, all the way down in dialogues editor. We can turn off missing sound cues if your game doesn't use sounds. There's also an option to enable animations if your game requires it. It's just nice to know if you've missed something. So there are a couple of ways we can start the dialogue. We can come into your controller and we can just call begin dialogue on event begin play, or we can come and add a debug key and we'll just do number 1. And it'll start the dialogue and we can come and select Nick here. So if we play the game, you can see we can walk around. If we press number 1, you see it pops up, hi, I'm Nick, and I'm Mark. We've got the subtle camera shake and the controls across the bottom, and that's it. We've come back to the game. You'll notice when the dialogue's playing, we can't move around, but we can skip it by pressing the space key. But that's not going to be super realistic to start dialogue. So the other way is we actually build in a node for you for testing. So if you jump into the plugins folder, if you can't see that, just hit the settings cog and make sure you've got plugin content enabled. Jump into narrative tales, blueprints, and you've got this dialogue trigger here. So I'll just drop this in the corner over here. I'll delete this one because I can see what it actually is because they're all different. And then I can set this to be whichever dialogue I want. So we can set it to Nick. And now if I play the game, you can see as I run over to here, it will automatically start the dialogue. There you go. Hi, I'm Nick. This is really useful if you want the player to say something to them, or if you're walking past an NPC, you can make them talk to you. So we can also add player options now. So we've got our NPCs talking, but if we drag off and select the player response, we can give the options to the player to select things. So we can ask them how they are, and the player options have slightly different properties you can modify. So we can change what the specific option text is. So instead of saying how are you guys, we can just say how are you in the dialogue option. We can add a hint text if it starts dialogue, and we've got other auto select options to make the player to not have to select it on screen. So we'll just add 2 responses here, and we'll set the text to be have any quests. And we can drag off of these again, and you'll notice we won't be able to select a player option now because you can't add a player option to a player option. So we'll just add one for Rupert to say good. For they have any quests, we'll just drag down from Mark and we'll just say, for example, yes, we do. And now if we hit compile and save and we'll run up to our little trigger, you'll see we'll be prompted with the normal text, but now we will have the option to select on screen, and we've got this lovely cinematic camera shot of the player. You see it's blurred out all the background automatically, it's focused as a medium close-up, and the subtle camera shake is there. So we can select our options here, and if I just connect my controller, you'll see Unreal's detected it, and immediately it's switched to a controller-based input. So I can come down and I can select it. You'll also notice there's shortcut keys for it, so we can also press 1 or 2 if we want to select it automatically. So I will say, how are you? And you'll see it'll instantly pop up, ask the question, and it will retain the camera angle. We can also fully move around, come back into the dialogue, and you see it's fully controller supported right out the box. You'll notice where we can exit the dialogue if we press the B option. That is completely customizable in the class defaults here. So as you scroll down, we've got a bunch of configuration settings, such as unskippable if we can't skip specific nodes, or the can be exited, whereas if we uncheck that, we can't exit the dialogue anymore. So if we join, you can see the escape button has gone, we can't quit out. This is a mandatory dialogue. And we can ask him if he's got any quests, and yes we do. Perfect. One cool thing you'll notice is Narrative Tales remembers everything you do in dialogue and quests. So at any moment you can re-query that if you want to change the course of your game, which is what makes it stand out so well. So if I come up and ask these guys, hey, how are you? And then I walk away and come back, it will remember that I said that. And now you can see it's grayed out telling me I've already selected it. And we can do the same for have any quests. So later on, when we get into narrative conditions, we can query anything in the narrative verse to say, if you've already said it, don't let them say it again. Or we can change what they've said. But some other options in here, the end dialogue distance, if we come and tick free movement and just hit compile, typically you're going to want to remove the camera if you tick free movement. But then this lets us talk and walk around at the same time. You'll also want to stop auto-stop movement, because if they're walking and talking, you don't want to freeze the player. So you'll see now if I walk up, it's not going to freeze me. I'll still be able to freely walk around. You can see the dialogue is talking. This is fantastic if you've met an NPC and you're walking to a specific area as they're talking. You will notice we don't get the option to select the player options, and that's because we're currently in game. So we can get around that by coming here and just telling it to auto-select this node if we want to go down that route on free movement. So you'll see we start the dialogue, they're going to say their normal routine, but the player will automatically say their side as well. How are you guys? There we go. And it'll carry on the dialogue automatically. You see that in AAA games such as Red Dead or GTA all the time. For now, I'm going to come and untick this as free movement so we can go back to where we were. I'll auto stop movement. I'll make the speakers rotate to face one another. And I'll just add our medium shot back in. We can, of course, come in and add specific shots to these people as well, where we can come and say, when Rupert says, "and I'm Rupert," we can say, hey, get a nice close-up to his face. But of course that's not going to work because we don't have any NPCs in the system at the moment. So we'll start off with a basic Manny, and then we'll go on to importing metahumans after. So I'll come to my third person blueprints folder, and you can see we've got the third person character. I'm just going to duplicate this and name it BP NPC, and we'll open this up. We don't need any of the control part of it, so we can delete all of that off, and we don't need the camera either, so we can delete that off as well. We just want the standard NPC. Just to make it stand out, we'll change it to be the Manny version instead of the Quinn, and that's pretty much it. We can hit compile and save. A common mistake is you don't need a narrative component on your NPC. You only need one narrative component per player. We've got a single player game, we have one component. So now we can come back to our world, we can drag our NPC in, we'll place him roughly where this dialogue trigger is, and then the key part is we need to tell Narrative's dialogue how to find this NPC, that he relates to Nick. So we simply do this with tags, actor tags specifically. So go to the search for tag, and just set the tag to be the name of your speaker ID, so Nick. I'm going to duplicate this around here, and we'll add one for Mark, and we'll do the same for Rupert as well. We can make these look a little bit different, so if you just select one of your Mannies, find the material, and just hit the little folder browse icon. If we duplicate this and just rename it to Material Instance Manny Red, open it up, and in the base colour, you can just come and set it to be a reddish colour, like so. Hit apply OK, and then back on the game, we can select our Manny and just select it to the new red version like that. And we can do the same with this one, we'll just make it blue. Just so they stand out and they're a little bit different from one another. And now I'll come back and I'll just set him to be the blue variety. Like so, there we go. And now if we play the dialogue this time, you'll see it will properly aim the camera at each individual NPC as they talk. So there is Nick, there is Mark, and there is Rupert, look, all facing correctly, and it comes back to the player here. You'll notice we didn't get the player options. That is just simply because we have marked this player option as auto select, so we'll just uncheck that. Auto select simply tells Narrative to select this node if it can. And auto select if only reply is if there is only one player option, it will automatically select it anyway. So it lets you customize it. So if we hide this one after we've selected it, and this one is ticked as auto select, it will just automatically select it. Some other options we do have the option to select is skippable if we want to be able to skip the line or not. And we also have the alternative lines feature where we can come and give the player just something random to say. So instead of how are you guys, how are we doing? And Narrative will randomly pick between these two, and you can see you've got all the same shots and dialogue sounds if you need it. So if we come up this time, run down, we can see them talking, skip it, and we can come to how are you, and it says how we're doing. It's used the alternative line this time, which is looking pretty cool. One thing we didn't cover when we were doing the free movement node is at the end dialogue distance. This is where you can cut the audio off if the player walks far enough away. So if I set this to 1,000 and set this dialogue back to free movement and untick everything, as we walk up to the NPC and start talking to them, they'll talk just like we're in free movement mode, like so. But if I walk far enough away, the dialogue will automatically stop itself, which is fantastic. Because if you're in the middle of talking to an NPC, you don't want them talking to you when you've run halfway across the world. We'll come back to this later when we start looking at narrative events, because we can plug into it and make them reply to you when you get far enough away, which is a common trope you see in open world games where they'll say, hey, come back over here. So another thing narrative does well is it gives you the option to choose who you are talking to specifically, either via the tags method, which we've done here, where you add an actor tag to it, or you can actually tell narrative to spawn something in at runtime for an NPC. So on the speakers, you have this speaker avatar class. So if you're in a first-person game, for example, you might use the speaker avatar class on the player's speaker info to spawn in a visual representation of the player character. And narrative will handle cleaning all that up for you automatically. So if I just come and create a child component of the NPC and call it NPC player, and we'll just set them to be the blue variety for now, but we'll do it on both so they look different. We'll make it red and blue so it looks different. Back on the dialogue, if we set the player's speaker class to be this specific one, narrative will automatically spawn this in when the dialogue starts. So if I drop down now, we are the female Quinn version. So you'll see when it starts, it comes in, and you can see it's automatically spawned us in the dark, granted, but it has spawned us in differently. The reason it spawned us in the dark is because we need to set the avatar transform here. So where do we want to spawn them in? If I just duplicate him out here, I can copy his location, delete him off. We can now paste this location in and say, hey, spawn the player here. If we try it this time, you'll see it spawned the player in with our custom avatar look. And we can hit, how are you? And it ends, and we're back to normal look. That's a great option if you're doing first person, or if the NPCs in your world aren't fully rigged for metahuman quality, high quality. You can make them all basic versions, and when you initiate dialogue, you can spawn the speaker in. What you may have noticed a minute ago is we got really close to them and the camera angles weren't fantastic. So you can see we're cutting off specifically where they are. We can tell narrative to automatically move the player to a specific location. So if we just place the player here and we know this camera angle looks good, we can copy the location. Back on the dialogue, we can scroll down and we've got this auto adjust player transform. So if we tick it and open it up, we can say when we start this dialogue, specifically place the player here. Meaning if we run up and we start the dialogue by jumping directly down on top of it, too close to make it look good, it will automatically move us. You'll see it's automatically moved us out of the way, so we're not going to intrude onto it, and it's put us back when we come back in. So you can really get the cinematic dialogue you want, no matter where the player goes and starts it. Another common thing you see in dialogue is something we call backlinking, where you've asked a question, and then you want to go back to the menu to select another one. So I'm just going to come down and make an empty node up here after Rupert. We'll just set it to Mark, for example. And I'll come and make this a compact view node here. It's just a little placeholder node if you wish. And I'll connect the player options to there like so. After we've asked Rupert, how are you? And he said, we're good. We can bring this all the way back up and you see it starts to curve around to there and it goes blue. And this means it's a backlink. So once we've asked this question and Rupert's replied, it will go back up here and represent us the options again if we want to continue dialogue that way. So you'll see, how are you? It says, I'm good, and then it brings us back to the menu for us to carry on the dialogue. You will notice some NPCs will look sideways. On the dialogue, you can specifically say who you are talking to at the time. So we could say Nick will target the player by default, but we could say, hey, instead, look at Rupert, for example. Or in this case, when we ask, how are you guys, we can just aim them at the middle character, which is Mark, and we can specifically say player face Mark. Meaning if we start the dialogue facing sideways, when we ask the question, it will face Mark specifically. So using manis are all good, but most people are going to be wanting to use their own characters, whether custom or like a metahuman or a CC4 character, Syntin, anything like that. And narrative makes it really easy, no matter how you've done it, to control these characters and use them. So in the description, we've got a finished project hosted where it's got a bunch of metahumans on it. It's all pre-set up. It's basically the end of this course here that we've got. But in there, we've pre-imported some metahumans, or just a few different ones we can use in this tutorial. If you don't want to use those ones, import any metahuman you want. Import your Synti characters, your CC4. It doesn't matter. Just import them and get them into Unreal. So if I jump into this William Hardy character and open it up, this is just a standard imported metahuman. So it's a type of actor, and you can use a type of actor or a character. Depending on your game, you may want to convert this over to a character. If you're wanting him to walk around and do AI stuff, using him as a pawn or a character is going to be easier, but we're just going to use him as a character for now. And you'll notice in this metahuman example, at least, he's a modular character, and that means his body is separate to his face, to his feet, to his legs, to his torso. And that means they're all separate actors, so I can move his feet away. And it's all coded in the construction script to join together. That's how modular characters for metahumans, at least, work. If you've got a CC4 character and you've exported it modular, it'll be the same thing, but you'll need to enable the master pose in order to make it work. I believe it might be renamed to enable main pose, I don't remember. But the key thing is, it needs to run this leader pose component logic. If you've got the metahuman, it does it for you. If you've got your character as a singular mesh, so it's more akin to the Mani characters, where it's just a singular mesh, this absolutely can work too. We just need to do a tiny bit of modification to narrative, which is all built in to allow you to do it. But for us looking at the metahumans for now, super easily, we've got our metahuman, but one thing you'll notice is if we drag this character in, is he's actually facing a different orientation. So if I select this Mani here, you'll see the red arrow is following forwards, but the metahuman is facing sideways. I don't know why Unreal does this, but by default, the metahumans are rotated 90 degrees away from the forward axis. This is the forward axis, but they're rotated 90 degrees. So just select your body component and just rotate it 90 degrees so it's facing the correct way, and hit compile and save. Whilst you're here, you can also set the body's anim class to be the unarmed one, and he'll start animating and look less rigid. But now he's facing the correct way, so we can rotate him wherever we want. And then setting him up is as easy as we set the other NPCs up. We simply give him a tag. In this case, we will call this one Nick. And then we'll remove the other Nick, so I'll just call him Nick2, just so he's not interfering with it. And then that's pretty much it. If we play it now, you'll notice we'll get some interesting results. And that it's pointing to his feet. So the way narrative works is it initially tries to say, are you a type of character? We know this guy isn't a type of character, so it can't guarantee that it actually has any skeletal mesh on it, because an actor doesn't need it. Whereas the NPC has got a mesh on it, it's part of a character, so narrative just instantly finds this and says, hey, give me your head bone. For this character, we need to specifically tell narrative, hey, this is where your body is. So select the body here, and just add a component tag of head with a capital H. And then on your face, only if you've got the modular version, just add a tag of face. And this allows narrative in order to know which components need to play the facial animations and which ones need to play the body animations. And the body animations is how it finds the head, because this skeletal mesh also contains the head. If you've got a singular character, you just need to apply the body tag. Don't worry about the facial one, we'll come on to that shortly. But this time you'll notice, when we play it, the camera will be correctly oriented to his head. There you go. Look at that. We now have a metahuman in our scene. But that's all good, but metahumans are supposed to be animated, because then they look really cool. And same with any character you've got. So, what we've done also is we've included a bunch of demo animations and content. So inside the demo animations, we've got some head and some dialogue animations. So for the body dialogue animations, we've just got a bunch of ones for free that you can use, and they do all sorts of just things like this, just basic animations. So there's a key thing with animations you need to do, and you can only play animations via montages, because that's how we play it in the background. We tell Unreal to play the montage. So simply right-click your animations, create animation montage. It'll take a moment, but then it'll shoot through and just do them all up. And now, if you open one up, it'll be the exact same thing, but you'll have an animation for it. Now, the key thing is, no matter whether you've got a split body or a modular character or a singular one, you need to make sure the body is playing on the default slot by default. That's how it works just with Unreal. If you get more technical, you can change it around. But then, the next one is the head montage, which we've also included some animation live link ones captured by Mr. Ruben himself. Now this is where it changes. If you're using a modular character, you can just go ahead and keep this as the default slot because they're two separate actors, that's okay. However, if you have a singular character and you want the body to play different animations to the head, you need to change the slot on this animation montage to head slot or face slot, something like that. And then back on your character's animation blueprint for the singular characters, not the modular ones, we just open up the built-in animation blueprint. On the anim graph, you need to include the default slot somewhere. This is for both modular and non-modular. That's how you play montages in Unreal. You need this slot to allow it to play animation montages for the default slot. But for the singular mesh people, you also need this to contain your head or face slot. And then you want to blend those two together by the facial bone. So this facial slot will play on the face, and then this one will play on the body. That's how you make it work for characters who are singular meshed. As I say, for you guys who've got modular characters, you don't need to worry about that. But the modular ones, you'll probably have a face anim BP, which when you open it, it basically does a bunch of things for the live link if you've got that set up. The key thing is you also have the default slot on here somewhere as well. If you download the metahumans, they typically come with this built in. But typically, if a user doesn't have that, the montages just won't work. And now with all of that prerequisites out the way, we can come back and we can just select one of the random sounds that we've got. So we've got a bunch of demo sounds, so I'll just select one of the basic ones, so come on dude. And then we can find the body animation, so we'll just get a random calm one. And then we can also apply the facial montage. If you can't see these, just make sure they're rigged to the right character and you've got montages. But you'll notice now for Nick, when we play it, he will be fully animated in face, body, and sound. Check this out.
Come on, dude, I need this light powered on.
How cool does that look? It would obviously look a lot better once we've updated the text, but fully animated and looking very, very cool. So I'm going to get rid of the old Nick and just put this guy over here. So there is a tradition amongst narrative tutorials, but there's always a quest that we go into where you speak to the guys and they tell you there's a big light bulb, it's run out of batteries, you need to help them find batteries. They have a little dispute, you run off, pick some batteries up, come back, and then you power the light, and then they're all happy. So we're going to aim towards creating that, as you saw at the beginning of the video. So I'm just going to go through with everything we've seen here, and I'm just going to update this dialogue to have the new one for the light quest that we're going to be having. So in typical narrative fashion, I've gone through and I've recreated the dialogue that we normally go with for the tutorials. So you can see we've got Nick introducing himself, discovering the player, Rupert commenting along, and I've even added custom shots to a couple of them, and there's a back and forth dialogue with them all talking about how they need to turn the light on and find the batteries. Everything we've already done. So here is your challenge if you're following along. Go ahead and create this dialogue. All the animations have been provided, all of the sounds have been provided for every single shot. The only exception is Mark, who just stands there in complete silence. So once you've done that, we should have some very nice fully animated dialogue, but obviously it's going to look better if we replace all of the characters. So what we've also done inside the Pastor Vincent is we have avatars for each of these characters. So we've got one for Mark, we've got one for Nick, and we've got one for Rupert. All pre-set up, tagged like normal. And then we can go ahead and we can delete these characters and just place in the new ones, however you want. I'm going to jump back into the dialogue avatar and just make sure the body has the unarmed animation blueprint, so they're animating properly. There we go. Then I will double check that they've got tags correctly, so Nick, Mark, and Rupert. And then we can adjust the dialogue trigger however you want, and then we can basically walk up and try it now.
Ah, finally! There's a player here. Look, guys.
And you'll see
Oh
it's
my
all fully
God, sweet
animated,
release.
camera
We have been
angles.
standing here
Of course we need
for
to
what
handle the
feels like
player,
years.
but it's all fully animated. Oh, we even got a very
Sweet.
close-up of Mark's face
Oh
then.
my God.
One thing I'll note about Unreal and the live link or the facial animations, on the skeletal mesh for your face, you need to make sure that you have two things set up. On your facial animation, you need to make sure you have the morph targets enabled. There's a bunch of different standards, but the typical one is the 52 Apple AR kit ones. And this just lets you move parts of the character and animate them. If you're trying to record your live link in Unreal 5.4 onwards, you also need to include the curves for it as well, which I'll make note to paste this in, but you can just paste in what we have in the description and it will add all the curves in, which will just make live link work for you. So that's a key thing. So we can also replace the character while we're here. So I'm just going to come and open up my player character. So the easiest way to actually do this is to actually come and make a copy of one of the other ones. So we'll just make a copy of BP William Hardy. I'll duplicate this into my third person characters folder and I'll rename this to BP Metahuman Player, open it up, and then we've got all of the default stuff set up. So we can just come over and we can change his face to be the Reuben one, and you can adjust any materials you want or anything like that. The key thing is come up to class settings and change his base class to be a type of character. This means we can take over it, walk around. And then I'm going to grab the body mesh and I'm going to paste it over the standard mesh. I'll make sure to move it down and rotate it correctly. So 90 degrees down and rotate it to 90 across. And then I'll select the body. I'll copy the skeletal mesh asset and I'll paste it on top of the mesh one. I'll assign the anim class to be the unarmed one and you'll see it's animating already. And then I can move this body down and rotate it around 90 degrees. And then I can start reparenting the face and everything inside the mesh, like so. And we can move these down 90 as well, just so it all lines up correctly. And now we no longer need the root or the body, but don't get rid of them just yet. To make it easier, right-click the body, find references by name, and everywhere you see body, we're just going to go through and replace it with mesh instead. It's often easier to do this before you delete it, so you can actually still find everything. When you get to these ones here where it's on anim initialized from the body, just right click the mesh, add event on anim initialized and just replace the event. Just make sure you keep finding references on the body to make sure you remove everything where it's not needed. You'll know pretty much straight away if you've missed something because it just won't work. So I can now delete these two off because we no longer need them, and make sure you replace root with your mesh as well. You can basically replace both of them. And then when you delete it, your metahuman should still look metahuman-y, but if you hit compile, it should all sync up nicely. Finally, you need to bring over the cameras, so come and drag the camera boom and the follow camera, paste it on your capsule component to add it in, and then finally come to the event graph and just make sure you copy all of the code and just add it on top to the existing stuff. It will complain about some missed functions, so just come back across and copy those as well. This is the best way I've found to make the cleanest metahuman when you drag it across. If it complains about this middle one, that's just touching, so you don't need to worry about that unless you're doing mobile games. And then everything else, you can just refresh your nodes. And if you come and set it as your default pawn class, when you click play, you'll see we now have a working metahuman. You notice the legs are a bit funky, we do need to fix that. But now when we play dialogue, the player should be animated and will talk as well. To fix the animation issues, it's just because metahumans aren't fully built to be game ready, but it's super easy to adjust. Just open up the anim BP unarmed and just disconnect the control rig. Unless you need the control rig, then you'll need to find another way. But now he walks properly and we can come up and we can play animation properly. You see every single character is animated and voiced. How cool is that? Just some other bits to wrap up the dialogue segment. Dialogues use a process called NPC Chunking, where it gathers all of the same person's or the NPC's dialogue together so it can rapidly fire it off and it doesn't have to keep running back to try and understand it. So what I mean by that is the only exception is the player. It's split into two groups, NPCs and player. So in this dialogue, narrative will find the first node, which is Nick, an NPC, second node, Nick, NPC, third node, Rupert, NPC, and it will load all of that dialogue, sound, and animations ready to be used. It will then switch to the player and it will unload all of those and it won't do anything else until you select this one for the player, and then it will load this player's animations, and then it will go through and chunk the next batch of NPCs into memory. And the reason I'm mentioning this is it's a common confusion that people will apply an event on the first one to run some code, and then on the next few NPC nodes, their conditions won't work, which we'll get into in a moment. And the reason is because it's chunked it together. It's run the code here, which has loaded all of these, checked all the conditions. So if you want to run an event at the start of a node and then check something at the end of it, but it's all in one chunk, just make sure that you have a breaker in the middle of a player node that just automatically plays itself. And that's narrative allows it to split it up. So Narrative Tails has been made completely customizable. So if any of this functionality doesn't work for you, or you need to change it or modify it, there is 21 different functions you can come and override to change exactly how it works. The current documentation we have for Tails goes over all of these functions in great detail if you need to understand what they do. But a common one people often do is if you want to add variable names inside your dialog directly to report something specific. So what I mean by that is if we just disconnect the Nick node for now, holding Alt and clicking it, drag off, add another node for Nick and say, hey, and then in curly brace we'll put player name, curly brace, how are you? We can come and override the function GetStringVaraible. And what we can do now is switch on the variable name, and in the pin names we can put the one we're looking for, so player name, and then if it's the default pin, we'll just connect it to the return node, but we'll make sure we do add call to parent like so, and connect it all up, just so it runs its normal logic and returns the correct data. But if it's the player name, then we can make it specifically go off and get something, the player's name or an item name, anything you want, and here we'll just put rubes. And if we play it this time, Narrative will automatically find that this node has curly brace in, it will run the getString function which we've overridden, and we've made it return rubes. And you see if I run up this time, you see it's automatically replaced it in dialogue. This is fantastic if you want to do random quests, dialogue, where the specific items are trying to be found. But there's a ton of other functions you can override to do anything you want. But we don't just stop there, because this is just functions on the dialogue. If you jump back to your controller with your narrative component, you also have a ton of functions in narrative you can assign, you can bind to, if you want to change functionality that way as well. So a common use case for this is a lot of people will do on dialogue finished here. And you can tie this in to say after dialogue is finished, start a quest or activate a cutscene or do something, unlock a new area, a data layer. It's very common. And it even gives you a nice little reason, which is a type of enum, where you can say specifically why has it finished. Very, very useful. So I highly recommend having a look at what functions you can bind to, because there's tons and tons and tons you can do. Even quest failed or quest succeeded is other options. So the next big thing in dialogue we're going to look at before we move on to events is a new feature called tagged dialogue. So this is where we can specifically reference a dialogue asset and say on this specific event, fire this dialogue. It's very, very useful for games where you can walk around characters. It's super simple to use. So I'm just going to come and open up my narrative dialogue folder, and I'll just create a new narrative dialogue for Nick called db_Nick tagged dialogue, and I'll open it up. So what I'll do in here is I'll just give Nick some free movement dialogue. So we don't want any cameras, we don't want him to stop. In the speakers, we'll just make this for Nick, and we'll set him on the first speaker. And on here, I'll just say, hey you, come here. And we'll hit compile and save, and that's it. Just a very basic dialogue, right? You can call it anything you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and find Nick, and I'm going to open up his specific avatar, and I'm going to give him a large sphere collision. And what we can do with this is we can extend this out and say if the player is in range of this, we can tell the player, just like it does with GTA 5, to hey, come over here, they talk to you. So I'll make it fairly large, but you can see it's a decent range, but I'm going to make it probably a little bit bigger. Yeah, so if the player comes down here, I'll say, hey, you, come here, right? And then what I'll do is I'll add an event here on component begin overlap, And I'll just say if the other actor equals the get player pawn, and we'll add a branch. So if the player walks into this sphere, I'm then going to use two of the common functions. You can either do get narrative component, which works for most cases if you're doing a single player game. If you're running a multiplayer game, you might be better using get narrative component from target. We'll do an isValid check just to make sure it actually has a narrative component. And then what we can do from here is we can add in the tagged dialogue component. And this is one built into narrative, which is new, but it allows you to add a tagged dialogue set to it, so a set of different dialogue. So back to my narrative folder, and I'll just come and create a new miscellaneous data asset, and I'll search for the new narrative tagged dialogue set, and I'll click select. I'll call it TDS for tagged dialogue set _ Nick, and I'll open it up. And in here we can add a new one, and we can use gameplay tags in order to drive the event. So we're going to say greet, because these are two we've built in. If you want to add another one, click the drop down, click add subtag, give it a new one such as quest finished, set the source to be your default gameplay tags and click add and it'll add it. But we'll use greeting. The dialogue file, we want to use Nick tagged dialogue, and we'll say it can only play it every 30 seconds, so it doesn't play if you keep running in and out, and you can't be 5,000 distance away. We'll save that. We'll jump back to Nick, and we'll set his tagged dialogue set, and then we can drag the tagged dialogue in, and we can call play tagged dialogue. Which dialogue do we want to play? We will specifically want to play the narrative tagged dialogue greeting, and the guy who started it is indeed the get player pawn. And narrative, just like that, will now play dialogue when we go and hit that specifically. So we can run down and you'll see it says, hey you, come here. If we exit and run back in, it doesn't replay because we've not passed 30 seconds. And if we play it this time, you'll see he will greet us when we get close enough to him. Hey you, come here. And then we can walk over there and we can begin the dialogue. How cool is that? And tag dialogue set can be set up on anything. So if you attack them, you can add a tag for damaged or attacked, greeting, drive-by, anything you can think tagged dialogue is great for. Next, it's time to look at the next big powerful part of narrative tales, and that's narrative events. Now there's two types of events. There's the singular generic file, and then there's the direct code. You may have accidentally activated the direct code if you've double-clicked on any of the nodes in here. And if you see a lightning bolt, it just means that you've accidentally double-clicked it. Or if you come over to the event graph, you'll see you've got a bunch of these nodes here. Shift-click if you just want to remove them. It's fine, it's not going to do anything. But the benefit of it is, you can add code directly to a specific node to execute. So if you've got something you want to execute for one node in the entire game, you can just come and double click it and it'll give you an event, like so. The parameters are the node is the node you've clicked on, and started is whether or not the node has first started or whether it's ended. So you've got three opportunities to execute your code, at the start, at the end, or both. So we highly recommend you add a branch here just to control the flow of it. And then what we can say is after this node is finished here, you can execute some code. So for example, I could spawn an actor, and in our example content, we have a light bulb. We could spawn the light bulb in, and I can split the transform and say spawn it on top of here, look. We'll spawn it right there. I can copy each individual location back on the dialogue, and we can spawn it in, and we'll just say always spawn it in. And now just with that little bit there, if we delete this light bulb off, when we run up to Nick, that bulb isn't there yet because we're not ready to do anything with it. So it can come over here and speak to them. And if we say, have you got any quests? And we'll say, yes, sure, we'll help. You'll see that it's now run the narrative event and the light bulb has spawned, which is fantastic because then it means we can do whatever we want with it. So that's what we call node-based events, right? But the other powerful part is narrative has events built in where you can code and script and reuse. So on here, where before we were doing, instead of running it that way, if I know I want to rerun it, I can come to the events dropdown on any node or quest node, and I can add a bunch of specific events here. So narrative comes with a few by default, which is for narrative tales. If you do have any other narrative plugins, such as the inventory, the interaction, the navigator, they have their own events that automatically plug in. So we could just say, come and begin dialogue as a basic one, and it's got its own parameters in. So the default category will just say, play Nick's tag dialogue for now, and we can pass in any details we want to it. But then it's got 3 categories that every event has. The event category, refire on load, which means when the narrative component loads, should this event refire. So if you've got an event to destroy a boulder so you can access a cave, you're probably going to want that event to refire when narrative loads itself. If you've got an event that starts dialogue, you probably don't want that to refire every single time, so you can undo it. You've got the event runtime, so this is just like where we double clicked it, whether you want to run this event at the start, the end, or both, so we'll just say end. Parties is something we will come on to later, but we've not touched it yet, and that's just whether or not you run it on the party, for all the party members, or just the leader of the party. And then conditions is something we will come to afterwards, but events can now contain conditions as well to say, should you run this event on these cases? So it might be, if the quest has failed, don't rerun this condition, for example. But now we've added that event dynamically like that, we can come and start the dialogue again. And if we agree to help and he says, thank you, 3 batteries should do it, you see the dialogue has immediately begun because that's what the event told it to do. So that's all good, but we don't want to be starting dialogue. And no matter what you do, whatever game you're making, you're going to want to make your own narrative events. And it is ridiculously easy to do. It shouldn't be this easy, but it is. And this also is a great time to add in, you can build events for other plugins that are not associated with narrative. So if you've got Ultra Dynamic Sky or Async Loading Screen or any other of the millions of Unreal plugins, combat plugins, mounting plugins, anything like that, you can code it in to an event. And it's super easy to do. So if I just come back to my narrative folder, I'll create a new folder in here called Events, and I will right click and I will choose Narrative Event here. And I'll call it NE Spawn Battery. And I'll open this up. So it has 5 functions you can override, but you typically only do 1 or 2 for the most common events. Execute event is the actual physical code you want to run. So in my case, I want to drag this off and do spawn actor from class. And I want to spawn a static mesh. So I'll spawn a static mesh actor. The transform, well, I want to pick where it's spawning it. So I'm just going to promote this to a variable. The collision override I'll set to always spawn, and then from here I will do set static mesh on the static mesh component, and I can even go as far to promote this mesh to a variable as well. And that's pretty much your event done, really. And now if we come back to Nick here, instead of starting dialogue, you can see we've got our NE spawn battery, where we can come and pick the mesh, so it'll be our battery mesh, and we can pick where we want to spawn it. So I'll say I want to spawn it up here. And back on Nick, we can just tell it to spawn it right there. You'll notice it says any spawn battery, which is not inherently useful to see. So firstly, I will come and rename this from spawn battery to spawn static mesh, because it just makes it a bit easier to read. But you've got some other ways you can modify it. Firstly, if you come to class settings, you've got the default Unreal stuff. So I'll call the blueprint display name spawn static mesh. You can add a description if you want, and then you can even add other categories and stuff if you want. And when we're looking at events, that will all make it look nice and neat look. But you've got other functions as well. So get graph display text. This is what it displays in the graph here. So at the moment it says any spawn battery. If I delete this off, drag backwards off the return value and do append, I can say spawn a, and we'll drag the mesh in and drag it to here and let it get the display name spawn a battery. And we'll hit compile, save, and you'll see it now say spawn a SM battery big. So that's how you can change what it says dynamically. The other functions are get hint text. So if you apply this event to a player node, for example, something we've not covered just yet is you can add hints to the player node. So if you agree to help with this quest here, you can actually add hint text here saying begins quest. But alternatively, the events themselves can add hints directly to the node. So if we were to use the begin quest node, which I know we've not touched quest yet, this has the get hint text overridden to add the begins hint text directly to it. The other two nodes are the new nodes we've added in the 3.7 release for activate and deactivate. These run just before the event runs and just after it finishes. Just in case you want to do any pre-init async loading or something, you've got the option there. But there's our event all nice and done. So if we were to play it this time, you'll see there's nothing over there at the moment. But if we were to talk to him now and we agree to help, and you'll see if I run up here now, you can see the very small battery has spawned underneath the floor. So we can probably move this up and do all sorts of other things we want to do to it. But it is indeed spawned, look. And that is the narrative event. It's so easy to do. Just a note, if you do have an issue with this where it's not setting the static mesh in some versions of Unreal, just make sure you drag off your static mesh actor and set its movability. Just make sure you set its mobility to movable, otherwise Unreal won't let you automatically assign a static mesh to it. But you'll see the battery has indeed spawned up, just how we wanted it. And that is narrative events. They're really easy to create. There's a bunch of community ones that are often used. On the documentation, we go into all the details of events, and we've got the default events, and we've also got the community events here, which are common ones that people use. So you can see destroy actors is a very common one that we may actually end up putting into the plugin. But all this does is simply find an actor with a tag, loops over it, and destroys it. Absolutely perfect if you finish a quest or talk to somebody and they unlock a door or something. The possibilities with narrative events are endless. And now that we've covered events, we can move on to conditions. What are conditions? Just like narrative events that execute code, conditions check if something should be executed. So this is where you can expand your dialogue to be absolutely insane and use the power of narrative. So if you come to any single node, you'll have this conditions drop down here and open it up. Narrative comes with a bunch of pre-ones built in. If you use narrative other plugins, they also have their own conditions. But we can basically add a check to this node to say if any of these have passed or failed, then it will continue. So for example, a very common one is if he's already said this, we don't want him saying it again. That's just weird. So add a condition of has dialogue node played, and we'll open it up. And in the options, it'll say which node are you looking for. And you'll notice we don't have to provide the dialogue. And that's because narrative remembers every single node you've ever played. It will remember it so you can query it at any point. So I want to say if this specific node, so I'll copy the ID and paste it into here. That's just shift right click, shift left click, paste. And we'll open the conditions and say not. The quantity is how many times has it played. So if you have got this node set up so you can play it 3 times, you can set this quantity to be 3 if you want to. But we just want to say if it's played once or not played once, then it will continue on. It's got the same parties logic as the events if you want to run the check on the party or specific members, for example. But now that we've said this, we've basically said only play this node if it's not already played once. And what that lets us do now is we can add a node next to it, and we can now say, hey, it's you again. Just like that. And now the first time you run up to it, he will say this. But then the second time, this is already played, so it'll then run this node here. So if we run up to him this time, he says the normal node, we go down the normal path, and we'll say we can't help. But if we run away and come back, you'll see it now says, hey, you again. How cool is that? It has remembered that we said it before. So this is not inherently grateful for where we are here, but what we can do is make this work with a quest soon, where we say if the quest isn't in progress, then we go down the normal route, but if the quest is in progress, we can make it skip all this dialogue directly to here and say, do you want to find the batteries or not? And conditions can be placed pretty much anywhere. You can place it on the actual node, you can place it directly on the individual line or the alternative lines. This is a great way that if you have a swearing option or a blood option, adult option, stuff like that, you can toggle it in one node, or even a gender or a class specific thing. So you can create a condition that says if you're male, play this node, and then in alternative lines you have a different version, and you can add the condition for the female one in here. Or swearing yes, swearing no, anything like that. It's all possible with the conditions. One of the other ones we saw earlier is you can also add conditions to events. So in here, we can add a condition to this event to say don't spawn if the battery is already spawned. There's endless possibilities with it. And just like events, conditions can be created for any plugin as well. They are super simple to do. So we're going to create a basic event now that simply checks if this light bulb that we're going to be rescuing later is actually on or not. So let's come in and drag our example content light bulb into the world. And I'll scale it up to probably 2 by 2 by 2. And then I will come back to my narrative folder. I'll create a new folder called Conditions. And inside here, right click, narrative condition. We'll call it NC for narrative condition is light bulb on. And we'll open it up. This one only has 2 functions because it's super easy. Check condition and get graph display text. That's it. Check condition is the actual functional code it runs. And you'll see it is a function. It needs to return a true or a false. And the way it works is if it's true, it will continue down. If you tick not and the version is true, it will still go down. So essentially it's got to be true to pass on. If you have multiple conditions in a node, it will be treated as an AND, so every single condition must be true. If you've got a place where you want to say if this is true or this is true, go and do this option, simply add a node per OR sequence, add your conditions to it and make them connect to the same place like that. And the narrative will check the first one, fail, check the second one, pass it and go to the same place. But to make the condition, we will simply find an actor in our world, so get all actors of class. And we want to find the light bulb. I'll get the first one. And I happen to know this light bulb has a boolean called light on. So we can get the light on and we can just return it straight away like that. And you can use this for anything, any plugin you want. So I've created conditions for my own games where I get ultra dynamic sky and say, is the weather sunny? Is the current time below this? And we can execute stuff like that. So just editing this video talking about the conditions. One thing I forgot to mention is I do actually have this hosted on my GitHub, and it's got a bunch of narrative conditions and events for ultra dynamic sky specifically, where you can check the weather type, check the time of day, and then you've also got the change time, change weather, change wind. You know, there's a bunch of different ones. They're just examples, but if you are using ultra dynamic sky, super easy to download that and just place it in your project. We can of course come and edit the graph display text as well. So we'll just append backwards off of this, and we can just say, is the light on? And you can also set the class settings, check if light is on. And now back on our DB Nick, we can add a condition in the middle of this, and we can say if they've already gone down here and checked and got the quest, we can come here and add a condition to say, is the light currently on? And we've not got anything to pass to it, so that's fine. And if it is, we can make him say, thank you again, and we can hit compile and save. One thing to note about narrative conditions is they always run left to right. So it will check this node first, then this node, then this node. If I put this node first, it will always play that one because there's no conditions on it and it's the first node. Hence why I've put it at the very end. So we've got this one here which says, has it played? Play it. Is the light on? Play it. Do that one. You could equally put this one over there. That would make no difference to the logic at all. But if we try it this time, you can see the light is clearly not on. But if I run down and talk to him, he will do his normal spiel. But if I were to come and turn the light on by default, by opening the static mesh and just setting the light to be on, hit compile. If I try it this time, because the boolean's true, he will say thank you again, because the condition has passed it. And that is narrative conditions. There is one caveat to narrative conditions that I'm going to mention. It may change in the future, so check the change logs. But at the moment, in narrative 3.7, conditions don't work inside quests. There's an alternative way to do it. However, it is becoming more prominent with the more community members that conditions in quests are going to be very beneficial, so we're actually thinking about adding it in anyway. But that's it, let's get on to quests. So narrative quests are how you make quests in your game. Missions, objectives, tasks. It's how you can build the story up and give the player actions to do. To make your first quest, simply open up your quest folder, right click, narrative quest, and I'm going to call it QB_find the batteries. And I'm going to open it up. And you'll see it looks exactly like the dialog file, but there are some different class defaults. So we can set the quest name, so find the batteries. And we can add a description, find the batteries to power the light. This is all localizable as well. If you've got that set up with the flags, it's all set that way. We can say whether or not it's tracked. If you've got Narrative Navigator, you can plug that in together. Otherwise, if you've got your own map plugin, you can all set that up. We've got quest dialogue. So it's very common that a quest will have some sort of dialogue that goes with it. So what you can do is actually link these two together if you want a quick way to reference between the dialogue or the quest that works with each other. It's just a little handy shortcut. And then if we head over to the quest graph, we've got our first quest start node, which is a quest state. You simply drag all the way to the right, so it works just like dialogue with left to right. So we can drag off and you can see we've got the different tasks we can add. So we can simply say, go to location, for example, and it's added a branch and automatically added a state. So what's the difference between a state and a branch? So we've actually got a diagram for this on the documents because this is one thing users get confused with the quest logic. A state is like a door or a pathway. You stand there and you make your decisions before you go to it. Completing the task is opening the door or going down the path. So you very well may only have a single task like that. So you'll be stood there waiting for the task to open or the door, or you choose to go down the path. So in our dialogue case, we've got a state there and we will stay here. That's our current state until we complete this task on the branch. Then we'll move to the next state and wait for this one. You can absolutely create branching quests where you can add multiple tasks like so. And then you will wait here and you will be displayed both of these. And whichever one you complete, that is the path you will go down to that state. That's how you can create such powerful quests using narrative. So on each state, you've got some very basic details where you can just add a description and add any events you want. This is the conditions I mentioned earlier, wherein currently, as it stands, narrative 3.7, conditions don't work in quests. If you want to do a condition, you will add multiple branches. On the branches, you have a few more details, specifically whether it's hidden or not. So this could be for hidden objectives. But the key thing is the quest tasks. Each branch can not only have its own task, it can have multiple tasks to make it complete. So we could say, go to this location and move some amount of meters. So if we open this up and say, you must move 500 meters. But to carry on with this, we also must say, you must also run to, and let's just say this location here. So we'll grab the location, go back to our quest and paste it there. We can add a friendly location name and say a ramp, and it'll say go to a ramp. And that's pretty much it. That is how you build up quests. If you want to finish your quest off, you can drag off and choose fail or succeed, and that will give you the relevant nodes like so. But you only ever have one state connected to the output of a branch. So you can see it will only ever connect to one. So you'll see if I delete this quest state off and just add a succeed, and it'll say go to this ramp and move 500 meters. But how do we begin the quest? Well, there are a bunch of ways. You can do it on a debug key, just like we did with the dialogue, where you drag the narrative component in and choose begin quest. You can add it as part of a dialogue event. So there's an event built in called the begin quest. And we've also made it super easy that you've also got a trigger for begin quest like so, just like you do with the dialogue. So we can come and set this quest to be the find the batteries quest. And just like that, if you play it now and run towards this begin quest node, it will pop up and say, go to the ramp and move 500 meters. So we can move to this ramp and you see it's automatically completed that task off for us. Fantastic. But we've not finished the task yet because we need to move 500 meters. And I am currently regretting setting this to so high. So let's come and change that to something a lot lower, to say something like 20. But we'll make it a bit more interesting. Let's make it a branching dialogue and say you can either go to a ramp and move 20 meters, or you can push your limit and just move to 30 meters for some reason. And then if you do it this way, however, we can say you will fail the quest because you didn't do it in time. So let's start the quest. If we run over to here and start the quest, you see we now have two actions. We can go to a ramp and move 20 meters, or we can move 30 meters. So if I just move 30 meters, you'll see we've just failed the quest because we moved too much. However, if I start the quest, go to the ramp and move 20 meters, you see we've succeeded the quest. How cool is that? So just remember, you can only ever be on one state at once. If we say you move 50 meters and fail, otherwise we'll add a state here. And now we can say, go and talk to Nick. So we can say talk to Nick, and we can add his first dialogue node where he talks to us. So we'll grab the ID, come back over here, paste in the node ID. And remember, we don't have to add any dialogue because narrative remembers everything. And then we can succeed the node. This time the quest is now linked to dialogue as well. So we can come down here, start the quest, we can come and run to the ramp, and then we can run again, and it says now talk to Nick. It has officially bypassed this failure state where we were here with the chance to fail. It's waiting on this node here and telling us to talk to Nick. So we can run back over to here, and you'll see, and as you saw, when we completed the node, it completed the quest for us. That's how easy narrative quests are. They are super flexible, and it was built to be as flexible as you want. I've not yet found a quest that you cannot build in narrative. Some of the other tasks you've got that will become very helpful is you can complete a physical other quest in order to proceed on with this. That might be one that you hide, but you complete another quest and it allows you to continue your main quest. That's great for breaking down quests. You've got follow NPC to a location, so you can follow an NPC if you tell them where to go. If you both arrive, it will complete it. Go to location we've already used. Finish dialogue is when you talk to somebody and the dialogue ends. It will complete the task, and there's a bunch of others you can do. You can set the quantity on them, and you can set other things, whether they're optional quests as well. So we can come in and say, moving 20 meters is actually optional. You don't actually have to do it. And what that will now do is make this task automatically complete if the ramp has been reached. Otherwise, it will go to the 50 meters one. So now when we try, you'll see it will look different. You'll see it now says it's optional. So if I move over to here and hit this ramp, you'll see it's missed the optional objective. But if I run down here, start it again, but move 20 meters this time before I hit the ramp, and now you can see it's done both, which is very nice. So just like narrative conditions and narrative events, narrative tasks are super easy to make as well. And you can link it into any other plugin you want. So let's create a custom task now to actually pick up one of these batteries that we're spawning, because we haven't got a way to do that yet. So if we come to our narrative folder, and inside here we'll create a new folder called tasks, and I will right click narrative task here, and I'll call it nt_pickup battery. I'll open it up. So we've got a bunch of overridable functions here. Begin and end task is when the task actually starts. So begin task is the common one you'll use to activate and do everything you need. End task is used if you want to clear anything up. So if you've got a tick running or you're waiting on the player to do something, you can on end task you can clear all that up. Task description is what it shows on the actual UI. So if we just open up the blueprint task for moving, you see on begin task it gets the actor's location, and then on tick task it will constantly check the player's location and then update itself, and then it will set the distance moved on the task to complete it. But on task description it tells them move X meters, and then on progress update, that's how it was doing that little ticking thing to say this is how much you need to move in meters. Get node task description, so that's what it will actually show on this node here if you want it to say something different. And on task completed is something you can run beforehand if narrative completes the task. So how do you actually complete a task inside here? You've got two nodes you can use. You have add progress, and then you've got set progress. So add progress will simply take the current quantity. So on here, we can see we need to move 20 meters. So the quantity is set to 20. Add progress will just continuously set that on top of each other. So we're adding one at a time or two at a time. Great if you're picking things up. However, if you drop something, you can either pass -1 to it, or negative numbers to take it back down, or in some instances, it's actually easier to just outright set the progress itself. So you can say, I have 5 instantly. So combining those two and the narrative task, you can build up to do anything you want. So let's actually make something then that lets us pick up a battery then, because we don't have anything like that. So in my content folder, I'm just going to create a new blueprint class, type of actor called BP_battery. And I'll open this up. I'll add a static mesh inside of it, and I'll set this to my battery mesh. And I'll move it up. I'll even make it look fancy by adding a rotating movement component onto it, just to make it rotate all game style. I'll set the collision on this to be overlap all, just so we can run into it. And then I will add the on component begin overlap function. I will do our typical check to see if it's the player running into it. And then this is where you really get to choose what you want to do with it and how you want to connect it together. So if you've already got an inventory system, most of the good inventory systems, like narrative inventory here, will use event-driven programming, meaning you will have event dispatchers at the bottom that you can connect to when you've picked something up. However, we haven't got that in this tutorial. So what I'm actually going to do is add an event dispatcher at the bottom called onPickedUp, right? And then at the end of here, I will just drag this out of the true and say call onPickedUp like that. After I've picked it up, I'll just call destroy actor. So we've got a super basic battery, right? And now you'll see if we play it and run up to it, it will indeed destroy the battery and call it, right? Super simple battery pickup. But on our narrative task, we can, from begin task, get all the actors of class, so all the batteries in the world, we can loop over them all, and we can now bind to that event dispatcher and say, assign on picked up. And every time we pick one up, we can simply call add progress, so we add one more to it. For safety, and it's good practice to do so, we can also go to on end task, we can do the same get all actors of class check again, and then we can unbind from the picked up, and we can connect it up to there like so. That's just good practice that if you have 5 batteries in the world, it will unbind from it and not keep doing weird things. So back on our quest now, we can delete all these off here. We can add our new task of picked up battery. Let's just give it a better name. So class settings, pick up batteries. Compile and save. Back on our quest, we can now drag off pick up batteries. How many batteries do we want to pick up? 3. Compile and save. Let's add some more batteries around. You see, we'll add 4. We'll start the quest, and it says pick up. Oh, we haven't added the task description, but you can see as we pick them up, it indeed will add the batteries till it completes the task log. How cool is that? So just to make it look more official, we can either set the description here for the override, or we can make it automatically do it, which is a lot nicer. So on the override, we'll just go to get task description, delete this off, drag back off here and do format, and we can say pick up, curly brace, quantity, close curly brace, just like we did with the string variable, batteries. And now we can drag off the quantity and do get acquired quantity like that. Compile and save, meaning when we try it this time, pick up 3 batteries. And as we pick it up, it will automatically increase like that. There you go. We've made a super simple task or objective. Some common questions that people ask, can you randomize the required quantity? Yes. So if you come to begin task, you can now set the required quantity, and we can drag backwards and say random integer in range, and we will say randomize it between 2 and 4. And with that, narrative will automatically come and pick itself up, and every time we start the quest, it will randomly pick a number. So you can see pick up 4 batteries, or we can come down and you can say pick up 2 batteries. We need to obviously update the description there because it still says 3. but that's where we can come and update the quest progress task there, look. Another common trope with tasks is people want to not only find what's in the world, but they also want to dynamically find things on runtime. So for example, a task to kill 5 enemies, but then the enemies keep spawning themselves one at a time, this begin task is only going to run once. So what we recommend is either tracking when you kill an enemy and using an event dispatcher on begin task, or use the event tick task, and in narrative you can choose how often a tick interval runs. So you can say every second, so it's really lightweight. Go off and run the same check again to find additional ones. So if a new enemy spawns in, you can bind to it that way. That's another way you can do it. However, sometimes it's just easier to plug into an existing system without... However, sometimes you won't be able to get to the actor this way. There may be some reason why it just doesn't work, or the plugin's massive, it's going to take lots of editing to make it work this way, right? So narrative comes with another type of task called a data task. So if we come into our narrative tasks folder, you can right click narrative and you've got this data task here. This is essentially the same as a blueprint task, but you complete it from somewhere else. So if we call this data task dt underscore battery pickup, we'll do the same thing. We'll open it up. And in here, you can add some basic stuff like battery pickup, for the name, the description, anything like that. And then on the battery, instead of completing the on picked up, you can instead get the narrative component and you can call complete narrative data task, where you will pass in the task you've completed. So battery pickup, let's just connect this in here. Pickup name we'll say is battery. So instead of battery pickup, if you just made it pickup, and then you can set the pickup name to battery, turtle, egg, apple, chicken nuggets, anything like that. Pickup quantity. And then on the quest, you have a task of complete narrative data task. And you can specifically say which task. So we want the pickup and the argument is battery. And that's the exact same thing. Sometimes it's easier to go one way than it is the other. Now the keen-eyed of you may notice there is a play dialogue node data task. And that's because the way narrative remembers everything is every single dialogue node, when it plays, completes a narrative data task with the ID of the node. So you can quickly query it using conditions. So data tasks are super useful if you've got a different way of needing to do something. Otherwise, narrative tasks are the key thing. Some other things about quests and tasks that will be helpful for you. Retroactive is a common thing you will see on some narrative tasks, and it's a good thing to build in for some tasks. And it basically means, has the player completed it before? So if we go the data task route, we could say, only from this point on, the player must collect 3 batteries. But if you tick it, because narrative remembers everything, if you've ever picked up a battery, narrative will consider it automatically built into the task for you. Very, very nice. So with everything we've learnt so far, we can now start the quest to pick up 3 batteries. We can add a state in. We can then tell it to go and play a dialogue node, which will complete the quest when we tell Nick that we've picked it up. So if we go back to Nick, so on the dialogue, if we drag down, we can add some new dialogue for Rupert, and we can add a condition to it. Is the quest in progress? And the quest we are looking for is find the batteries. And we can say, have you found the batteries yet? And we can add the animations and the sounds to it. What's all built in. Have you found the batteries yet? And we can give the player some options. The first option is going to be, no, I haven't found them yet. Otherwise, we can tell them that, yes, we have found the batteries, where we can add everything we need. And then you'll notice, though, we can immediately say that we do have them, even though we might not have them yet. So this is a great time to add a condition to say, is the quest at a specific state? The quest we're looking at is the find the batteries quest. And the state we are on is going to be this one here. We have found the batteries. We're waiting to talk to Nick. So we can copy this ID back to the dialogue. We can now add this state there. And we can say you can only select this one if you're at that correct state. And then after this one, we've told them we've found it. Rupert can now thank us, and we can add everything to it like that. And then we can take this final node, because narrative remembers everything. We can come back and say, once we've completed talking to him, it succeeds the quest, just like that. Some other things to note, just like dialogue, you can double click on any of these nodes to add specific logic to it, and the activated is true or false if it's started or ended, just like dialogue. And then let's modify this so it actually does begin on the dialogue. So once we've talked to Nick and Rupert gives us the dialogue, we can make it spawn the batteries in specific places, which we'll do in a moment, but we can now make it begin the quest of find the batteries. And we'll set this to run at the end, so once he's told us and we don't need to refire it. So we can now come and delete the quest spawner here. We can start the quest, we run down towards Nick, they'll talk to us, we'll say, do you have any quests? And we'll say, yes, we will help. The quest will begin to say, pick up 3 batteries. We'll pick the batteries up, and then it'll say, talk back to Rupert. So we'll run back over. He'll ask us if we've found the batteries, in which case we can now say, yes, we have. There we go. Quest succeeded. Equally, if we were to talk to Nick and then talk to him again, we'll agree to help. But if we talk to him without finding it, have you found the batteries yet? You'll see narrative has automatically said, no, we don't. And that's because we have it ticked as auto-select if it's the only reply. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? So let's flesh out this quest just a little bit more whilst we're here. So I'll delete these batteries here, and I'll put them at all the locations we need to find them. So the one here, I'll copy the location. I'll come back to our quest, and I'll say when this quest begins. So on this quest start, we need an event to spawn the battery in, but that's super simple because we've already done it. So I'll come back to my events folder. I'll just duplicate this spawn static mesh, and I'll call it any spawn battery. I'll open it up, and instead of spawning a static mesh, I'll instead spawn the battery. The transform will do everything for us. We don't need to set anything else on it, and we don't need the mesh. On the getGraph display text, I will just simply set this to spawn a battery. You absolutely, if you wanted to, could make this spawn an array of transformed batteries. If you've got lots to spawn in specific locations, sometimes that can be useful. We've only got 3. So I'll just give it a nice name, spawn a battery, compile and save. Back to our quest. On the quest start, I can now add the spawn a battery. The location is the first one here, so we can copy the location. Back to our quest, we can add it in, and we will say run at the start of it. And we do want to refire this on load, just in case they haven't completed the quest yet. And I can now duplicate this 2 more times for the next 2 batteries. So we'll put one down here, and I'll copy the location. We'll open up the second event, and we'll add it into the spawn transform. And for the third one, let's put it somewhere unique. We'll put it over this side, look. Copy the location, and we'll add it to the third event here. And now you'll see there are no batteries in the scene, but if we come over to here, so now that we've agreed to help, the batteries have indeed spawned in, we can come and pick them up, look. And you see the quest updates. If we come back and talk to him, he'll ask us if we've found the batteries. No, we haven't found them all yet, so we can come back over here to pick this one up. And you'll see it now says go and talk to Rupert. We can come back and we can give him the batteries for the light. There we go. Quest succeeded. There is your first quest in Narrative Tales. So at the moment, when we go and pick up all 3 batteries, the quest just carries on. It just tells us to go to the next area. But a good thing about dialogue is you don't actually have to have all of the cinematics. So what we can do is when we've picked up all 3 of the batteries, we can have the UI to tell the player what to do, but we can also make the player say something, such as, I can now take these batteries back to Nick, or something like that. So I'm just going to come to my dialogue folder, I'll right-click Narrative Dialogue, and I'll just call it DB Player for Dialogue Blueprint Player. And then in the dialogue, if we just come to class settings, we can actually add the player as a speaker as well. And then if we simply right-click and choose Add Dialogue Line for Player, you'll notice it's not the same player as if we were to drag off and do player response. This is just treating the player as a speaker. And you'll notice we're not connecting it either. And that's because with Narrative Tales, you don't actually have to go down the branch if it doesn't work for you. you can specifically reference the ID, which we'll do in a moment. So on this dialog here, I'm going to come up to the text and type, I should take these batteries back to Rick. You can add your sound, you can add your animation if you want to. The key thing is, on class defaults, just make sure you've got it all set up with no cameras, it doesn't stop the player. And then come and copy the ID of the node. And then jump back to your quest, and after the branch where it picks up the 3 batteries where you want it to say it, so on the state, just add an event of begin dialog. Inside here, select your dialog, so we'll select player, and then inside the player parameters we can customize how it plays that dialog, such as we can tell it to start from this ID, we can make it a high priority by setting it to 1, and we can also override any of the settings if we want to, but we're not going to. The only other thing is make sure it's set to event runtime of start, and I'm going to keep refire on load ticked, because you want it at the start of the node here, so as it comes from the branch to the start of it, it plays it, then it waits for us to talk to Rupert, and then it carries on. And if we play it this time, and start the quest, you can see we can come and pick the batteries up, and you can absolutely make this do it per battery as well if you want to say, hey, I found a battery, or something like that. And then you'll see as we pick up the last battery, the player will talk to himself. See, I should take these batteries back to Rupert, in which case we can come down here. So that's a great way to add emphasis into your game and just make it feel a little bit more polished, like the player is talking to themselves. One other thing we can do for the dialogue is once we've handed everything back to Nick, at the moment, he just always says thank you again after we've put the light on, right? But there is another condition we can run where we can check if the actual quest has been completed, which is just an alternative way of doing it. The check if the light is on is a completely valid approach, but an alternative way you could do it is you could come down and check if the quest has been succeeded specifically. So if we go to the find the batteries quest, if we complete the quest, then they will just always say this. That's another way you can approach it. So it's common in games that when you complete a quest, you get some kind of reward from it. And this can be gold, XP, weapons, stats, anything you want. And with all of the custom functions in narrative, this is ridiculously easy to do. So what you can do is you can either come to the quest state and create a custom event to give XP, give weapon, give item, give gold, something like that. Or what we can do if all of your quests, or the majority of them, are going to want to give some type of reward, is we can come and use the quest master that we set up earlier. So if we come and edit our quest master, I'm going to add a variable here called reward XP. And I'm going to come and set this to an integer or whatever you want it to be, items or anything. And then because we've set that variable there, if we come back to our quest on class defaults, we've now got a reward XP here. So I can say for completing this, you will get 50 XP. And how do we grant that? Well, we can come back to our master quest again, and we can override the function on quest succeeded. And from here, we just get the player. So I'll do get player controller. Temporarily, I'll just cast to the correct one. And then from here, this is where you can get the XP if you have it. I don't have a variable there. And then you simply drag in your reward XP and add it to the player's reward. But in this case, I'll just print out a text and I'll format it and I'll just say the player gained XP in brackets, and I can connect it up like that. Which means this time when I finish the quest, I will gain XP. And you'll see after I collect the final battery, it'll say I need to take it back to Rupert. So we can walk over to Rupert and we can talk to him and it'll say, have you found the batteries yet? Yes, I have them right here. And if you look at the top corner, it'll say the player gained 50 because they gained 50 XP, which is a fantastic way of doing it. Of course, if your quest has multiple finish points, then you might be better going via the events route where you just put an event on there saying grant XP or something like that. But the narrative plugin actually has built-in notifications if you need it. So instead of using the print text, what we could actually do, if we simply right-click, we actually have a show narrative HUD notification. It's a global function. And we can connect this up to our format text and say how long it'll be visible for. And this is built into the narrative common UI, which we use as part of the Tails setup. So now you'll see, as we go back, it will show a proper notification instead of printing out at the top. As you can see at the bottom right, we now have a notification built in, which is very, very cool. So we've learned a lot about narrative already, and hopefully you're starting to see just how powerful it is. If you can code it, you can pretty much make narrative do it. But as part of the latest update in 3.7, we've added a new feature called quest requirements. And each quest has these requirements on them. So if we just come to the event graph of a quest, we can right click and do add quest requirement. And you've also got remove quest requirement as well. And in here, we can actually add in a specific requirement we create. So narrative does come with one built in called stay near actor. And this is just almost a normal blueprint, but it's a type of quest requirement. And when you create it, this basically runs alongside your quest as a whole, and it checks some logic. So in this case, this is checking that you are near an actor, otherwise it's going to fail the quest. And what it does is it uses the fail quest node here to actively fail the quest if you fail it for some reason, or in this case, you leave the NPC. So this will be very, very useful. For example, if you pick up some items and it says do not drop the items, you can add a requirement that says if you drop the items, fail the quest. Or you could even make this go back to another part of a quest. So from get owning quest, if you drag off and do enter state, you can make it go back to a different node. And these are really simple to use. All you do is back on your quest where you want to add it. We'll just do it when we have to talk to Rupert, that if we get too far away from him, it fails the quest. So I'm just going to double click this to add a temporary node like this. And we'll add a branch here to say only do it at the start of this quest, so when we come into it. Then I'm going to add a quest requirement. And you'll notice we have to add a type of object reference here, but we've set all this up for you. So in the variables, if you just come and add a new variable for your stay near actor requirement, you can search for the type instanced quest requirements, something we've already added in for you. And on here, if you just hit compile, you can come and set all the settings you need to right here. So we'll say it's a type of stay near actor, and you can open it up and set everything you need. So we want to say we have to at least stay near this actor here, which is Mark. So we'll search for Mark. We'll give it a tag of Mark so it can find it. And then we've even got warning messages and other stuff that we've built in for you to see. So warning, you are leaving Mark, you left Mark, and then we'll just not put any return message on. The max units is the distance, so we'll just set it to 5,000 as a test. And the seconds leeway is how many seconds you get before the messages start popping up, so we'll just say 10 seconds. And now if we drag this in and just simply drag off it and do break, we can connect this straight up to the requirement like so. So if we were to test it this time, at the moment the requirement's not been placed, so let's pick up all the batteries. I don't actually know the distance away from him, so this will be entertaining. We might fail straight away. So you can see at the moment the fail state is on, but if I run far away, so it turns out 5,000 was a bit of a big number for this one. Even over other side of the map here, it's 4,800, so just not big enough to get away from him. So let's just come back to our quest, select the requirement, and we'll just set it to something a lot lower at about 4,000. Let's try it now. If I collect all 3 batteries, and now if I were to leave the area like it said to, like I shouldn't be, it'll eventually pop up and say you are leaving Mark, and then the quest will fail, as you can see, because we left Mark, and the quest is no longer in progress. So that's how you can use the quest requirement system to add things in the middle of your quest to make it really do anything you want, and it's super useful to add things like that in the middle. So one common request we get is always, how do you modify the UI, and can you? And absolutely, narrative comes packaged with a UI that you can edit to your heart's content. So if you simply come to your plugins folder, inside the Narrative Tales content narrative UI widgets, you have all the different widgets that make up the game. So you've got everything from the BP Narrative 3 overlay, which is your quest updates, and that's got your branches, everything in, and your speaker text. Your quest branch is the individual branches that build up the quest details. The quest task is the actual task within inside the branch, so go to this location, pick up 3 batteries. The narrative menu dialog is the actual player options. The narrative button dialog option is the player's option they select. And you might have noticed I missed 2, and that's because narrative comes packaged with a fully functional quest journal, which we'll come on to in a moment. But the quest journal for the menu is how you access all your quests and see what you've got upcoming, and the quest journal quest is the actual option. One thing that some tinkering users like to play with, in the editor folder you've got the actual widgets that build up the narrative nodes themselves. So in your quest, all these nodes here, your dialogue, all these nodes, you can fully edit them as the widgets inside here and add other functionality if you really want to. One popular thing users add is adding extra features into here or displaying extra data, so just from a quick look they can see what's going off. So all the UIs are pretty much independent of narrative. If you don't want to use them, you absolutely don't have to. Everything in Narrative's UI is built up to show you how to do it. So when you first come into it, you'll basically have this comment on construct which initializes everything. It gets the narrative component so it can start binding to it. But the key functions you need are bind to component here. And what this does is loop over all the narrative's events, so begin, finished, line started, all of the different ones, and links to a relevant function to do what it needs to do. So for example, when an NPC starts talking, that will call the NPC line started event dispatcher here. And that will call the on NPC line dialog function. And you can see on here, all it does is literally get the text, build it up, and then set it. That's it. So you can absolutely customize this to do anything you want, look however you want, or even use your own UI if you've got that. Most of what we've designed is using common UI styles. So if you select any text on it, it's got this style property here. And inside the common UI folder, you have a style for every single type you can think. All the buttons, all the text. Meaning, if you come in and say, I want to change the narrative button's dialog text, you can come in, set it in this one place, and it does everything for you. It does mainly do text and button styles, but there are others you can add if you need to. And the common UI also has a bunch of other stuff like fonts and other widgets if you want to customize those as well. So Narrative does indeed come with its own quest journal, and it's super easy to use. So if you just come and open up your player controller or your player pawn, anything like that, normally you'd add a new key to show it, however you want to. However, I'm just going to use a debug key at the moment for tab. And I'm going to say when we press the tab, I'm going to get the player's HUD, I'm going to get the narrative HUD, and I'm going to call open menu because we're opening a narrative menu. And I'm going to select the quest journal. So now if I play the game and press the tab key, you see we have a fully functional journal. At the moment it's not so useful because we don't have a quest. So let's go and talk to Nick over here to get a quest. And you'll see now we have a quest when I press tab. We can find the batteries, it gives us a description and what we have to do. At the bottom, we do have a show parties quest, which we'll come on to later. That's just so you can differentiate between quests you own and quests that belong to the party. You do also have a track and untrack button up here. By default, this doesn't do anything in narrative, and that's because we don't have any waypoints or any map type system. So if you have Narrative Navigator, you can easily link that track up to track the quests via Navigator. Otherwise, if you've got your own map plugin, that's how you'll track the quest. It marks a boolean on the quest itself. But you'll notice if I come and collect the battery, hit tab, it's successfully updated it as it needs to. And it will update all the way, crossing off when you've done a task. If you come and finish the quest, Narrative will also move it to the finished quest part and untrack it for you. Super useful and great for adding into your game. So one little minor thing that I'm going to add in here, because I don't really know where to place it, but if we jump down here, he will tell us to come over to him. But if we run really quickly over to the start dialogue, it won't actually play. So you'll see if I jump down, hey, you come here, and I stand right here, the dialogue should have started, but it's not. And the reason is by default, so if we start the dialogue and then instantly run down here, you'll notice it won't play. And that's because Narrative gives you the option to have priorities in dialogue. By default, all priorities come to -1, which is the highest level priority you can do. It basically compares the numbers. But if you come to a dialogue tree again, you know that this number needs to always play when the player walks into it no matter what. You can come and set the priority to a lower number to play it. So if I set this to -1, and if I come and find his tagged dialogue that's playing, and if I set this number to something a bit higher and say something like 2, it's not important, we can now stop that dialogue when we hit the other one, just like that. Which is great if you want dialogue to prioritise over one another, or if you get an important phone call or you run into a quest event. Some other things that players often want is, in many games, people want the ability to skip dialogue themselves. They don't want it to play and then carry on. You know, like you see in JRPGs and stuff like that, where the player physically has to click. This is really simple to do in narrative. So you can just come over to your master dialogue if you want it. And there's two ways you can do this. If it's specific nodes you want to do it on, you can select it and change the duration from default to after to never. And this will basically mean the dialogue will never timer, it will have to be pressed to get past. The default option is it goes in order of priority. So when the audio ends, and then when the sequence ends if there's one attached to it, when the text runs out, so narrative adds some arbitrary time to each character and sums it up. However, if you want it across every single node, if you come back to your master dialogue and override the function getLineDuration, you can say how long every single node's supposed to take. You can filter on specific nodes as well if you want to, but if I come and set this to 999999, narrative will automatically cancel out pressing dialogue. And you'll see, if we run down now, no lines will finish until we tell it to. And you'll see, it will freeze until we specifically tell it to carry on. So we can press space or we can do whatever we need to. And it will move to the next line, and it will freeze again, waiting for us to press it. You can show some pop-ups or something like that if you want to. So one thing I mentioned earlier is the ability to copy and paste from ChatGPT directly into narrative. And that's because we support copying and pasting across quests and dialogue. It is easier in dialogue to copy from ChatGPT than it is quests, but it is possible. And you basically want it coming in as the format of speaker:text for everything. So if I were to come over to ChatGPT here and just type out, so I've just typed out a basic prompt to ChatGPT, can you generate me some dialogue between Nick, Malcolm, Rupert about how great the light is, please make it funny, blah, blah, blah. The key thing is, can you please put it in the format of speaker:text? And ChatGPT should go off and hopefully generate us something pretty useful. And there we go, we've pretty much got some nice text. So if I copy this and come back over to narrative, come back over to Unreal, inside my game folder, content, narrative, dialogue, let's just create a new narrative dialogue, db, Nick, random, and that's pretty much it. You can just paste it at this point, and you'll see narrative will automatically add the speakers in with the names that it's found, and it will link them all together like so, which is very, very cool. There are some limitations to this, obviously, because we can't code every single thing in. So if you do want player options, you absolutely can add those in. So if I just add something to Rupert there and add a player node, you just call it player, I can add testing like that. But if you want multiple player nodes, that you can't do. So what I tend to do is just put it beneath it and then carry on talking like normal. And then when you paste it in, you'll see narrative will break it up for you so you know you can just put it across like that. A lot of our advanced users have actually gone in and heavily modified the copy and pasting of this to support what they need in the C++. But that's by user, so it's entirely up to you if you want to do that. If you've got any suggestions for extra things we should add to the copy and paste, let us know below. So I hope by this point you're starting to see just how powerful this plugin is. It's insanely powerful, and the amount of users we have using it who have never looked back is just a testament to how good of a system it is. And some other features it's got is the built-in save and load system. So if you start a quest and you're going to obviously want to save your game at some point, we've made it super easy in the component itself. So if I just add a debug key of 1 and a debug key of 2 to act as a save and load feature, we can drag the narrative component in and simply call save, plug it into pressed, and then on narrative we can drag off and call load. In a more real environment, you'll have your save name stored somewhere and you'll call that specifically. Maybe you'll have a main menu, something like that. If you're using other plugins, such as the Narrative Pro system or the Easy Multisave, on post-load of your player controller or preload, either way, you can just call save and load as you need to. But now narrative will go off and save every single dialogue, every single quest, everything. So if I come down here and let's talk to these guys and start the quest, and I'll pick up 1 battery, and then I'll hit the number 1 key for us to save, and I'll quit the game. So before we'd start it again, we'd have to go up and do all of that. But if I press the load key, narrative has loaded everything back into memory. So you can see, find the batteries, we've already picked 1 up. We've not handled anything to spawn it over there, so we can do that later. He's telling us to come here again, but if you see, we'll talk to him. Have you found the batteries? Narrative has remembered that we were in the middle of a quest. How cool is that? I can pick this battery up and I can pick this battery up as well. And it goes back. I can save, quit my game, come back, press number 2. And then look, it's even said the event because we ticked it as rerun on load. So we need to take it back to Rupert, who we can now say, yes, we've found them, just like that. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? So whilst we are talking about the save and load system, a common request is when you load back in, people want to show the update for the quest. Now, this is something that does confuse new users, but it's not as easy as just showing the new quest updates, because narrative doesn't limit you on how many quests you can have running at once. You can have 50, 1,000, as many quests as your computer can handle, quests all active at once. Narrative doesn't stop you. If you want to only run one at once, you can. But let's say, for example, we do want to show a quest update for one of the quests, because you can't show all of the info at once. After we call load on narrative, we can get the component and we can get in progress quests like that, see? And now you can either loop over this, show a quest update, wait, show the next quest update. For me, I'm just going to go and get the first quest it finds that's in progress, right? And then, if you drag in your player's HUD, drag off and do get narrative 3 overlay, we can drag off and do show quest update, which is a key function in narrative that you can use to do this exact thing, or we use it in the event dispatcher to show the quest updates. So up here, you can say which quest are we talking about? Well, it's this one here. Which branch are we talking about? So this is the unique thing. Don't forget, in narrative, you can have as many branches active at once as you want, and narrative will let you go as infinite as you need to. So you need to tell it which branch are we showing the update for. So in this case, we can drag off of the quest and do get branch if you want to put a specific ID in. Otherwise, you can do get current state, and then you can do get branches. And then again, you can loop over it, or for me, I'm just going to call the first one, and then I will plug that in like that. And now, what you'll see is when we restart the game and load, it will immediately show an update for what we need to do. And it says we need to go back and talk to Rupert. How cool is that? Narrative does come with all of the source code, every single plugin does. So if you are good at C++ or you want to try your hand, it's perfect to go in and have a look at it. One of the common C++ changes users actually make is they want to add profile pictures to their speakers. We don't have that built into narrative by default because not every user wants it. But if you do want to add it in, it's super easy to add in the C++. It's like 2 lines of code that you can copy and paste, and then you can update the speakers here to add a profile picture to it. Some other common questions people ask about narrative that I'm just going to reel off at the end of the video here is how do you make it Skyrim style where it never looks at the player? So when we come into dialogue currently, it'll show the NPC, it shows the player. But if you've got a first-person game, you don't want them to see the player. And this is actually really easy to do. If you open up your dialogue and in class settings, close down the speakers, and on the default speaker shot for the player speaker info, just come and select anything, like the medium one, and then open it up. Wherever you see the word speaker, change that over to be listener instead. Because when narrative is in a dialogue, there's only ever one speaker and one listener. If the player is talking, they are the speaker, thus the NPC they are looking at is the listener. So if I change the player's speakers to be listener, and then one more place, copy the dialogue shot and paste it on selecting reply shot. Because selecting reply shot is when it's looking at the player to pick a dialogue option. And this time you'll see, if I come and speak to them now, we'll never see the player in dialogue. So it's talking to the NPC, and then it talks to Rupert, and you see we focused on Rupert as the player is making the option, just like you would in a first-person game. So I can select the option, and it still talks to the NPC. If you want to change which NPC they're talking to, just change the target in here for any of the nodes. Another common thing people say is sometimes they don't want the speaker's name in the dialogue. That's completely doable as well. Open up the BP Narrative 3 overlay, graph, and on your on-player dialogue line started and on NPC dialogue line started, you can just come and remove the speaker name from here, so it just shows the dialogue line like that, and then it will only ever show the text, it won't show the name of the people. Speaking of names, what you will notice is when we start dialogue, is it will say my computer's name. And What it will actually do if you publish your game is use your Steam name or your Xbox name or something like that. But if you don't want that, say you either want the players to input their names or you just want to change the text of the name, that's all built in as well. And it just uses Unreal's built-in name system. So on Event Begin Play, after we've done everything we want, if you just right-click and do Get Game Mode, drag off and choose Change Name, which is built into Unreal. This is not a narrative thing. But then you can set which controller are you changing it for. So if you've got multiplayer, you can pick which specific player controller. For us, we've only got one. And then you can set the new name. So I'll set it to Ruben. So I'll set it to Rubes and just click Name Change, compile and save. And you'll see this time we can run up and our name will be different. So you can see it now says Rubes saying this. You can set this to player or anything you want. It's very common for users of some games to have a menu option saying, what's your name? And then it just puts it in to here, right there. The final thing I'll go into before we move on to narrative parties is a common question is, does narrative support dynamic X, dynamic dialogue, dynamic quests, dynamic tasks? And the answer, as always, has to be, it depends what you mean by dynamic. If you mean that your dialogue has no nodes on it and ChatGPT generates it live, no, we don't support that directly, because all of these nodes are basically built into this asset here. This is one big data asset, essentially. So the data needs to be pre-generated. There are ways around this, where you can use a GetStringVaraible. So if I just drag off of here and put a response for Nick here, right at the beginning, I can just wrap the entire text in get Nick's line or something, and then I can overwrite that in GetStringVaraible like we discussed earlier. That works for some users, not everyone. But dynamic quests are something different. If you want a quest to randomly pick something at each task, yes, you can do that. We had a look at picking up batteries where we randomised the quantity. You can also randomise which actual item you need to pick up. So you can generate one quest saying find some items, and then on each task it randomizes what you need to find. You absolutely can do that. If you're wanting to have no tasks in here and randomly generate a task every single time, no, you can't really do that without a workaround. This is for a traditional, you build the quest, players can play it. So now it's time to move on to the narrative party system. Every single thing in Narrative Tales is fully replicated for a multiplayer game, but there are some ways you have to set it up to make it work. So on the example project, we've already set it up for you, so you can add a number of players, and you'll see I've now got 2 players, I can switch between them and run around, it's fully replicated, right? But you'll see if I run up to the NPCs as one player, it will only play it on that one player. This might be what you want, because some games you can start quests and dialogue alone, some games you can start it in a party or a group, and that's the system narrative goes with, a party system. So the way the narrative component works is each individual player has their own narrative component, and that stays the same. However, what you will do is create a replicated actor that is shared across all the players that stores the party component, and that party component stores a list of all the other narrative components. So what we'll do in this example is we will just come and create a new game state. So I'll click the plus, I'll just go into my blueprints and call it new game state base and click save. And on here, I will come and add the narrative party component. The only reason I'm using the game state is just because it's replicated. If you're doing a game like World of Warcraft where you can have multiple parties in the same world at once, you'll have to find another actor that's replicated. If you select the narrative party, there is a couple of options you can choose. So who is the actor who's picking the dialogue? By default, it's the party leader. That's the first player that's added to the party. But you can also say everyone can select it and the first one who does goes ahead with it. There has been some minor requests in the past for us to do a voting system, but it's never been that pushed that we've needed to add it in. But if you need it, let us know below. Maybe we can add it in. After you've done this, we now need to come and open the game mode and just make sure we're using our new game state, so new game state base, and then open full blueprint editor. And we're going to override the function handle new starting player. And this is what Unreal calls every single time a new player is added in to the game via the game mode. And what we can do is from the new player, we can get their narrative component, We can check if it's valid in case there's something off about it. And then if everything's all good, we can get the game state. And from here, we can now get a component by class. And the component we want is our party. And then from here, we can do add party member. And you'll notice that the member, we're not adding an actor, we're adding their narrative component. So we can drag this straight across into it like so. You can do a branch on it, an error if something's gone wrong, it can't add it for whatever reason. So error, can't add party, but normally there's a network failure or something like that. We'll plug the is not valid to it as well. And then the only other thing is you need to make sure you call add call to parent function right at the end, otherwise you'll get some errors and the player won't spawn at all. I'm going to connect that to the branch if true. You can also connect it to the error if you want them to spawn, regardless if they're in a party or not. They won't be able to interfere with the party member if they're not in it. And then just make sure you connect the new player to it like so. And for the most part, that is it almost set up now. The only other thing we need to do is back on the BP third person controller, and instead of spawning it on event begin play with all the UI and everything, what we're going to do instead is use the narrative event on joined party. This is optional, of course, because if you have the ability to not be in a party, you may not want to do it this way. But typically, if you're joining a party, you typically want it to be forced that they can't do anything until they're in the party. And because you're doing multiplayer, there are some other options we need to take into account as well. So the first one is the UI is not actually going to be rendered in every instance. And because the server is going to tell the client and then the client's going to action something, the player's HUD won't always be visible. So on begin dialogue for the narrative component, just add in a check for is it the local player controller and only should call open menu if it's true. This will stop any errors. And that, for the most part, is almost ready. The key difference is we can't actually just rely on this component alone starting the dialogue and showing the options. Because when the party talks, this narrative component isn't aware of it. There is actually a separate component. The narrative party component is actually a type of narrative tales component. It's its own narrative tales component, but it's shared across multiple people. So what we need to do is actually plug into this one and say when this has dialogue options started on it. And it is the exact same code as this, so I'll just copy this down here. But the difference is we're going to run this on party joined or on event begin play, either way. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click and do get game state. We're going to get component by class, which is going to be our party component. And then we're going to assign on dialogue began. And this is different to the one below. This one is only running for when the party starts dialogue. And we'll plug that in exactly how we just did, like so. And that is the last piece of setup you need for narrative parties. You'll notice it still will only do it single player like that. But now that we've got everything set up, this is where we come into the way you start dialogue and component and quests. So if you click on the quest selector or the dialogue selector, you will see we have this option of start on party. And what this does if we open it up is it checks whether this boolean's true or false. If it's true, then it actually gets the party component from the narrative component. And this is set on the game mode here. When we call add party member, it does the link together. And it says if you're running on the party component, then we start the dialogue on the party component itself, not on the player's narrative. And if this is false, which is where it is by default, then it will start on the player's narrative. So now, on the replicated game, if we run up and talk to Nick, you'll see it is completely synced up, replicated very nicely. You can't skip lines on multiplayer. So if you are doing a game where each player has to skip the line, that's not going to work. So I'm just going to come and remove the never skipping part, like so. Because if somebody's got a slower network, they can't realistically skip it and then keep up to date. So narrative just lets it all run in sync. And you'll see if I run it this time, and we'll just pin the client over. Let's bring the client over as well. There we go, and we'll bring the player over. You can see there's a bit of glitching there. But as we come up and start the dialogue, you can see it's perfectly synced up, all replicated perfectly the way it needs to be. You can't skip a line because we can't accurately replicate it across each player, but you can see from the different perspectives, the party leader is now selecting an option, so we'll select one and it will play across both like that. We are absolutely wanting to expand this functionality, however, and add loads of more things in, make it more reliable, customizable, but it does work out of the box, and we've got several clients currently using it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Narrative Tales, the huge guide to how it works. After this tutorial, you should be pretty confident in all things narrative. You should now be able to create separate quests, dialogue, parties, events, conditions, anything you want. Everything in this tutorial. We've not yet found a game that narrative cannot be plugged into or it cannot be modified in some way to work. Everything is really, really nice. The install takes a couple of minutes and then you're up and running. If you think we've missed anything in this tutorial, please let us know below. We can look at adding it in. We do have the Narrative Tales documentation that I'm going to update before this video hopefully comes out, and it's got lists of everything we've talked about, all to do with dialogue speakers. It's got an FAQ, quests, everything you could want in it. It's got a nice search at the top. It's a very nice website. There is also the Narrative Discord. We are extremely active in there. We've got thousands of users into the Discord, and we are there daily offering support for people who need it. Thank you for watching. I'm Dan from Narrative Tools, and I will see you next time.